The grand hall of the Washington Peace Forum fell silent as Senator Ron Johnson stood from his seat. The bright lights caught the determination in his eyes as he approached the microphone. For months, tensions had been building between political factions, with harsh words and accusations flying across party lines. But today, something extraordinary was about to happen. "Representative Crockett," Senator Johnson began, his voice clear and resolute, echoing through the hushed auditorium. "I've listened carefully to your comprehensive peace initiative. Despite our many political differences, I must say this. Your framework represents the most thoughtful, balanced approach to national unity I've encountered in my years of public service. Today, I'm officially endorsing this plan." The audience, filled with political figures, journalists, and citizens from across the spectrum, sat in stunned silence. Then, as the reality of this moment sank in, a wave of applause began to build, tentative at first, then swelling into thunderous cheers that filled the hall. What happened in those next moments wasn't just an unexpected political alliance. It was a turning point that could change the course of American politics forever. If you appreciate moments when leadership transcends partisanship for the common good, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content that highlights unity over division. To understand why Senator Johnson's endorsement of Representative Crockett's peace plan shocked the political world, we need to examine the backgrounds of these two prominent figures and the divided landscape they navigated. Senator Ron Johnson had built his reputation as a staunch conservative over decades in politics. After a successful business career in manufacturing, Johnson entered politics with a focus on fiscal responsibility and traditional conservative values. Known for his direct, sometimes combative style, Johnson had developed a reputation as a partisan fighter who rarely compromised on core issues. His supporters admired his unwavering principles, while critics accused him of contributing to political gridlock. Senator Johnson has always prioritized his convictions over political convenience, noted political analyst Maria Reynolds. His voting record shows consistent alignment with conservative positions on nearly every major issue for the past 15 years. Representative Jasmine Crockett had traveled a very different path. With a background in civil rights law before entering politics, Crockett had dedicated her career to advocating for underrepresented communities. Rising quickly through political ranks, she became known for her eloquent speeches on equality and justice. Progressive voters championed her as a voice for the future, while conservative media often portrayed her as too radical. The political climate surrounding them had grown increasingly toxic. After the contentious midterm elections, the nation seemed more polarized than ever. Cable news networks amplified the most extreme voices, while social media algorithms pushed citizens into hardened opinion bubbles. Trust in government institutions had fallen to historic lows, and public discourse had deteriorated into name-calling rather than substantive debate. It was against this backdrop that Representative Crockett quietly began developing her National Unity and Peace Initiative, a comprehensive plan addressing divisive issues through compromise, local empowerment, and renewed civic dialogue. What made Crockett's approach unique, explained Dr. Thomas Franklin, professor of political science, was that it didn't avoid difficult issues. Instead, it found previously unexplored middle ground through thoughtful policy design that acknowledged legitimate concerns from both progressive and conservative perspectives. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What political divide do you think most needs bridging in our country today? Your perspectives help guide our future content on bringing Americans together. The Washington Peace Forum was organized to address the growing national crisis of division. Held in the historic Constitution Hall, the event gathered political leaders, community organizers, and media figures for 3 days of presentations and discussions. Security was heightened after threats from extremist groups who opposed any form of political compromise. When Representative Crockett took the stage on the second day, expectations were mixed. Many assumed her presentation would follow predictable partisan lines. The atmosphere was already tense from earlier sessions, where speakers had traded thinly veiled accusations. Crockett approached the podium with a calm determination that immediately set her apart from previous speakers. Behind her, large screens displayed the title of her presentation, A Way Forward Together, the National Unity and Peace Initiative. I stand before you today not as a Democrat speaking to Republicans, or a progressive addressing conservatives," she began, "but as an American talking to fellow Americans about our shared future. The plan I'm presenting wasn't developed by think tanks or party committees. It emerged from hundreds of conversations with citizens across every demographic and political persuasion who are tired of division." Senator Johnson, seated in the front row with other senior legislators, initially maintained a skeptical expression, arms crossed defensively. The cameras caught his raised eyebrow as Crockett began outlining her first proposal, a new approach to border security. "We can acknowledge two truths simultaneously," Crockett explained. "First, that a sovereign nation must control its borders with effective security measures. And second, that we must treat all people with dignity and create legal pathways that reflect both our security needs and our values as a nation of immigrants." She then revealed the results of pilot programs that combined enhanced border technology with streamlined legal immigration processes, showing data that demonstrated improved security alongside reduced human suffering. "This isn't about left or right," she continued. "It's about what works." The audience stirred as Senator Johnson uncrossed his arms and leaned forward attentively. Crockett moved methodically through each divisive issue, from health care to education funding, gun safety to environmental protection, presenting solutions that defied easy political categorization. Each proposal featured concrete policy mechanisms rather than vague platitudes. When addressing energy policy, she outlined a framework that supported both immediate energy security through domestic production and accelerated development of renewable technologies. Communities dependent on traditional energy production need economic security during any transition, she emphasized. Meanwhile, we can't ignore the reality of climate change and its costs. Both concerns deserve our respect. Senator Johnson was seen taking detailed notes as several audience members glanced his way, surprised by his engagement. Halfway through her presentation, an unexpected interruption occurred. A well-known partisan commentator stood up from the audience. "This is just more of the same liberal wishful thinking," he shouted. "You're ignoring the fundamental differences between our values." A tense murmur ran through the crowd as security approached. Before they reached him, Crockett responded with remarkable composure. "Sir, I've actually addressed your specific concern on page 43 of the full proposal," she said, directing attention to the screen where she brought up the relevant section. "Your perspective represents many Americans who worry their values are being dismissed. I'd welcome your specific feedback after reviewing our approach." Her response, firm but respectful, seemed to diffuse the tension. The heckler, perhaps surprised at being taken seriously rather than dismissed, slowly sat down. As Crockett concluded her policy overview, she moved to the most powerful part of her presentation, the economic and social data projecting outcomes if the current division continued versus if a unity plan were implemented. "The cost of our division isn't just emotional or social," she said, revealing stark graphics showing economic forecasts, international competitiveness metrics, and public health statistics. "Every American is paying a measurable price for our inability to work together." The room grew quiet as the implications became clear. These weren't partisan talking points but sobering realities backed by research from institutions across the political spectrum. "The beauty of America has always been our ability to course-correct," Crockett said. "Our greatest moments came when leaders set aside party for country and found the courage to work together." As she finished, all eyes turned to the senior legislators in the front row. The question hanging in the air was clear. Who, if anyone, would be first to bridge the divide? The final slide of Crockett's presentation faded from the screen. A heavy silence filled Constitution Hall as she thanked the audience and gathered her materials. It was the moment of truth. Would her ambitious peace initiative be met with the usual partisan dismissals, or would someone break the cycle? Senator Johnson remained in his seat, seemingly deep in thought. The cameras caught his legislative director leaning over to whisper something, but Johnson gently shook his head. Then, with deliberate movements, he stood up and made his way toward the stage. The audience stirred with anticipation. Given their political history, most expected Johnson to offer polite but non-committal remarks or perhaps to highlight points of disagreement. Event organizers quickly brought a second microphone to the stage. Representative Crockett, Johnson began, his voice carrying the weight of his 20 years in politics. I came to this forum prepared to defend traditional conservative positions against what I assumed would be another progressive wish list. He paused, glancing down at the notepaper in his hand. Instead, I've heard something altogether different. A plan that doesn't dismiss concerns about government overreach or fiscal responsibility, but incorporates them alongside other priorities. The audience sat forward in their seats. This was already an unexpected response from a senator known for his partisan stance. What strikes me most, Johnson continued, is that your framework doesn't require either side to abandon core principles. It identifies the legitimate concerns behind opposing positions and addresses them simultaneously. Johnson turned slightly to face the audience, his expression earnest. I've spent my career fighting for conservative values, and I will continue to do so. But today, I'm reminded that my first obligation is to the American people and our shared future. He turned back to Crockett. Your border security approach maintains sovereignty while addressing humanitarian concerns. Your economic proposals support free markets while expanding opportunity. Your energy policy balances current needs with future responsibilities. Johnson took a deep breath, clearly aware of the significance of what he was about to say. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing the moment of decision that was visible in his eyes. I've always believed that we should evaluate ideas based on their merit, not their source, he said. In private business, before my political career, I would have immediately implemented a plan this sound. Politics has trained us to reject good ideas simply because they come from across the aisle. He paused, looking around the hall at his fellow conservatives, many of whom appeared confused or concerned. Let me speak directly to my Republican colleagues and supporters, Johnson continued. Nothing in this plan contradicts our core values of limited government, individual liberty, and fiscal responsibility. In fact, it incorporates these principles in ways we've advocated for years. A murmur went through the audience as people began to process the implications of his words. Then came the moment that would be replayed on news networks for weeks to come. Representative Crockett, I've listened carefully to your comprehensive peace initiative. Despite our many political differences, I must say this. Your framework represents the most thoughtful, balanced approach to national unity I've encountered in my years of public service. Today, I'm officially endorsing this plan. The silence that followed was profound. Journalists stopped typing, photographers forgot to capture the moment, and even the event organizers seemed frozen in place. This wasn't just a polite acknowledgement. It was a full endorsement from one of the Senate's most partisan figures. Crockett herself appeared momentarily stunned before composing herself and extending her hand to Johnson. Their handshake, firm and resolute, was the physical embodiment of the bridge their words had begun to build. Then, from the back of the hall, someone began to clap. The applause spread quickly, building into a standing ovation that lasted nearly 3 minutes. People who moments ago sat on opposite sides of the room were standing together, united not in ideology but in hope. When the applause finally settled, Johnson spoke again, this time with greater emotion in his voice. I'll be calling the Senate Majority Leader today to begin discussions about bringing elements of this plan forward for legislative action, and I invite my colleagues from both parties to join me in this effort. 3 senior representatives, spanning the political spectrum, rose from their seats and approached the stage in a show of support. The symbolic power of this moment, political opponents standing together, sent a clear message. Something extraordinary had begun. Crockett stepped forward to the microphone, her composure regained despite the surprise of the moment. Senator Johnson, she began, your willingness to evaluate this plan on its merits rather than its source demonstrates the very spirit of cooperation that our nation needs. This isn't about winning or losing, it's about finding a path forward together. She turned to address the entire audience. The challenges we face don't care about our political affiliations. Climate change doesn't check voter registration. Economic hardship doesn't distinguish between red states and blue states. Foreign adversaries don't target only Democrats or only Republicans. Her voice grew stronger. This plan isn't perfect. No plan is. But it represents a genuine attempt to honor the legitimate concerns of all Americans. And with Senator Johnson's support, we now have a real opportunity to turn these ideas into action. The moment grew even more powerful when a prominent progressive senator known for her frequent clashes with Johnson approached the stage. Senator Dianne Morales, who had been seated on the opposite side of the hall, made her way forward. "If Ron Johnson and Jasmine Crockett can find common ground," she announced, taking a third microphone, "then I believe we all can. Count me in as well." The hall erupted into another round of applause, even more enthusiastic than before. Political reporters in the audience were frantically calling their editors, knowing they were witnessing a potential turning point in American politics. As the formal session ended, cameras captured Johnson and Crockett engaged in earnest conversation, already discussing implementation details and potential challenges. They were soon joined by a growing circle of legislators from both parties, each adding their perspectives while a sense of cautious optimism filled the air. Outside the hall, citizens who had watched the live stream were sharing the moment on social media with hashtags like #Unity, It's Possible and #AmericaTogether, creating a rare moment of positive viral content in the political sphere. Within an hour, clips of the endorsement had been viewed over 2 million times, with comment sections showing unusually civil discourse. "I've covered politics for 30 years, remarked veteran journalist Edward Barnes to his cameraman, not realizing his microphone was still live, "and I honestly didn't think I'd ever see something like this again." In the back of the hall, an elderly couple who had volunteered at the forum stood watching with tears in their eyes. "My father fought in World War II, the woman said quietly, "and he always told me that Americans could disagree fiercely but still come together when it mattered most. I was beginning to think that America was gone forever." Her husband squeezed her hand. "Maybe not," he replied. "Maybe not." In the days following the Washington Peace Forum, political analysts struggled to categorize what became known simply as the moment. Cable news programs, accustomed to amplifying division, found themselves reporting on an outbreak of cooperation that defied their usual narratives. Senator Johnson's endorsement of Representative Crockett's peace plan represents more than just a political alliance, noted Dr. Eleanor Richards, presidential historian. It signals the potential beginning of a new era in American politics, one that recalls earlier periods when the national interest regularly transcended partisan concerns. The immediate impact was substantial. Within 48 hours, a bipartisan group of 16 senators and 27 representatives had signed a statement supporting the core principles of the National Unity and Peace Initiative. More surprising still was the public reaction. "We're seeing something remarkable in our polling data," explained James Morrison of National Opinion Research. "Support for the initiative crosses traditional demographic and political lines. 72% of Americans express favorable views, including 68% of registered Republicans and 76% of registered Democrats." A deeper dive into the polling revealed something even more significant. When respondents were asked what appealed to them about the plan, the answers weren't divided along party lines. Republicans praised elements that Democrats also valued, and vice versa. The shared values that had been obscured by partisan messaging for decades were suddenly visible again. Social media, long a battlefield of political hostility, showed signs of a different conversation emerging. Citizens began sharing stories of local cooperation across political lines, using hashtags inspired by the moment. Community groups organized unity dinners, where neighbors with different political views gathered for facilitated conversations about common concerns. Sarah Miller, a retired teacher from Ohio, posted a video that went viral after her unity dinner. "I've lived next door to Dave for 15 years, she explained, "and all that time I thought of him as that Republican neighbor. Tonight I learned he coaches special needs kids in basketball, just like I used to. We disagree on tax policy, but share the same passion for helping children. How did we not know this about each other?" Thousands of similar stories emerged across the country, as ordinary citizens discovered the humanity behind political labels. Local news outlets, desperate for positive content after years of covering conflict, amplified these stories of reconnection. 3 weeks after the forum, President Adams invited both Johnson and Crockett to the White House, where he announced the formation of a National Unity Commission to formally evaluate the initiative's proposals. "The American people are tired of division," the president stated in the Rose Garden ceremony. "Senator Johnson and Representative Crockett have shown us that finding common ground doesn't require abandoning principles. It requires the courage to see the legitimate concerns on all sides of an issue." The ceremony concluded with a symbolic gesture. Johnson and Crockett were each given half of a broken ceramic vessel. Together, they performed the traditional Japanese art of kintsugi, repairing the broken piece with gold-dusted lacquer that highlighted rather than hid the cracks. "Our differences remain visible," Crockett explained, holding the restored vessel. "But they become part of a stronger whole when joined with respect and understanding." The image became an enduring symbol of the movement, reproduced on everything from T-shirts to municipal buildings. Not everyone embraced the movement. Hardliners on both ends of the political spectrum criticized Johnson and Crockett as traitors to their respective causes. Protest groups formed, and several extremist commentators saw their ratings spike as they condemned any form of compromise. Senator Gregory Walsh, a longtime ally of Johnson, held a press conference denouncing the peace initiative. "This is nothing but surrender disguised as cooperation," he declared. "True conservatives should reject this betrayal of our principles." Similarly, progressive activist Maura Jenkins published a scathing editorial calling Crockett a sellout who has abandoned the fight for justice in favor of political expediency. Johnson and Crockett responded not with defensiveness, but with invitation. They scheduled meetings with their critics, listened to their concerns, and incorporated some of their suggestions into revised versions of the plan. "This resistance was expected," Crockett acknowledged in a joint interview with Johnson 6 months after the moment. "Systems resist change, and there are powerful interests invested in keeping Americans divided." Johnson nodded in agreement. "We're not naive about the challenges. But for the first time in decades, we're having the right arguments, not about whether the other side loves America, but about specific policies and their measurable outcomes for American citizens." He leaned forward, his passion evident. "I've had conservatives approach me, worried that I've abandoned our principles. I show them the actual policy language and ask, isn't this what we've been fighting for, just packaged differently? Most are surprised to discover that their core values are actually represented." The most significant impact came 1 year later, when the first major legislation inspired by the peace initiative passed Congress with surprising bipartisan support. The American Community Revitalization Act incorporated elements from both progressive and conservative visions: local control alongside targeted federal investment, regulatory streamlining alongside environmental protections. The bill's passage was celebrated in communities across America. In Detroit, a manufacturing plant reopened with updated green technology. In rural Nebraska, a community health center expanded services while reducing bureaucratic overhead. In both locations, citizens from across the political spectrum gathered for ribbon-cutting ceremonies, recognizing shared victories rather than partisan wins. "What makes this approach different is that it respects the core values behind opposing positions," explained Professor Samuel Williams, who had helped draft sections of the original peace plan. "It's not splitting the difference or finding a lukewarm middle. It's solving for multiple legitimate concerns simultaneously." Economic indicators began to respond to the new political stability. Markets rose as investor confidence increased. Foreign investment in American enterprises reached a 10-year high as international partners recognized the emerging political consensus around economic policy. "Political instability creates economic uncertainty," noted financial analyst Rebecca Chen. The Johnson-Crockett framework has reduced that uncertainty significantly, allowing for longer-term planning and investment that benefit workers and businesses alike. In community centers, town halls, and places of worship across America, citizens began using the framework from the National Unity Initiative to address local challenges. School boards that had been battlegrounds of ideological warfare started finding solutions that respected parental authority while protecting educational quality and inclusion. In Lakeside County, which had seen bitter fights over curriculum, parents and educators formed a collaborative committee using the Johnson-Crockett approach. The resulting education plan included strong academic standards, respect for diverse perspectives, increased teacher autonomy, and enhanced parental involvement, all principles that had previously been positioned as mutually exclusive. We discovered that parents and teachers actually want the same things for our children, explained Committee Chair Robert Jackson. We were just using different language and emphasizing different aspects of the same goals. 2 years after the moment, a national survey revealed a striking trend. For the first time in decades, public trust in government institutions was rising rather than falling. More significant still, Americans reported higher levels of trust in their neighbors with different political views. Mental health researchers noted another unexpected benefit. Rates of anxiety, depression, and reported loneliness began to decline as communities healed political divides. Political polarization had fractured many social connections, explained Dr. Jennifer Garcia. As people rebuild those bridges, we're seeing improved mental health outcomes. Humans are social creatures. Political division was literally making us sick. The Johnson-Crockett approach, as it's now called, hasn't eliminated our disagreements, noted sociologist Dr. Maria Hernandez. But it has changed how we disagree. There's a growing recognition that most Americans, regardless of political affiliation, want similar outcomes: safety, opportunity, freedom, and dignity, even when they disagree about means. International observers began studying the American experiment in unity. Parliamentary delegations from divided democracies visited to learn how the process might be adapted to their own political contexts. Academic institutions created fellowships and research centers dedicated to understanding and replicating the conditions that made the moment possible. The United Nations Secretary-General cited the Johnson-Crockett framework in an address on global cooperation. What began as a domestic American innovation may hold lessons for international conflict resolution. The principle of honoring opposing concerns simultaneously rather than forcing binary choices has profound implications for our global challenges. At a 5-year anniversary event commemorating the moment, both Johnson and Crockett, now co-chairs of the thriving National Unity Foundation, reflected on their unlikely partnership. "What I've learned," Johnson said, "is that respecting someone doesn't mean agreeing with them. It means taking their concerns seriously and finding solutions that address real needs rather than scoring political points." Crockett nodded. "This work has taught me that there's wisdom on all sides of our political divides. When we stop demonizing each other and start problem-solving together, we discover that apparent contradictions often contain complementary truths." Johnson smiled at his one-time political opposite. "When Jasmine and I first started working together, we kept waiting for the moment when one of us would have to compromise our core values. That moment never came, because we weren't trying to change each other's minds. We were trying to address each other's legitimate concerns simultaneously." Crockett added, "The real breakthrough came when we stopped focusing on what policies looked like and started focusing on what outcomes they produced. Conservatives want efficient government. So do progressives. Progressives want opportunity for marginalized communities. So do conservatives. We just had different ideas about how to get there." The audience, filled with Americans from across the political spectrum who had implemented unity initiative principles in their own communities, rose in sustained applause. As the anniversary event concluded, they unveiled a simple plaque to be installed in Constitution Hall, bearing words that had become something of a national motto in this new era. "Our differences need not divide us when we recognize the dignity in every perspective and the shared hopes behind opposing views. Unity isn't uniformity. It's the courageous choice to seek understanding before victory." A recent educational assessment found that children who began school after the moment showed markedly different attitudes toward political differences than previous generations. When presented with opposing viewpoints, they instinctively looked for underlying values and complementary truths, rather than assuming an either/or framework. "We may be witnessing the emergence of a fundamentally different political culture," observed educational researcher Dr. Michael Patel. "These children don't see compromise as surrender. They see it as creative problem-solving. If this pattern holds, American democracy may be entering a new and more constructive era." The story of Ron Johnson's unexpected endorsement of Jasmine Crockett's peace plan serves as a powerful reminder that in our most divided moments, leadership that transcends partisanship remains possible. Their example demonstrated that political courage isn't about fighting harder for one side, but about finding the vision to see beyond sides altogether to the common good that unites us all. If you found value in this story of unity overcoming division, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. In a media landscape often dominated by conflict, we're committed to highlighting moments when Americans find the courage to work together despite differences. Remember that each of us has the power to be bridge builders in our own communities, creating the kind of country we want to leave for future generations. America's challenges remain complex, and perspectives on solutions will continue to differ significantly. But the Johnson-Crockett moment reminds us that addressing these challenges effectively requires not just advocacy for particular positions, but the kind of courageous leadership that can find common ground amidst profound disagreement. In your own life, consider how you might apply the lessons from this remarkable story. How might you engage with different perspectives not as threats to be defeated, but as pieces of a larger truth? The health of our democracy depends on citizens who can combine strong convictions with the kind of open-minded respect that Johnson and Crockett demonstrated in their unprecedented partnership.